to speak. But it looks like it's 11 o'clock, and looks like most folks are here. I see Steve Hicks, you're here as well. Hello, Steve. And Peggy's saying hello to everyone. Yeah, Peggy, you get that to all panelists and attendees. That's perfect. So, well, it is wonderful to be here with you all. And thank you for putting in the comments, because then I don't feel so alone with this presentation. I know you all are out there, but sometimes these webinars can be a little bit odd. But super excited. This is actually the first of, I think, about series of 5 lectures we're going to be doing as part of the presidential seminar. And Emily Voss, who's one of the attendees today, is going to be doing the next one. She's going to be talking about Madison and the Constitution. And if I don't have that right, Emily, put in your title in the chat and I'll read it out. So, but like I said, for those of you all who are just arriving, we want to make this as interactive as possible. I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint and speaking my way through the PowerPoint. And if anyone has questions, I'm going to occasionally look over and see if there's any hands raised, and we can answer those questions. This is designed to be an hour, but I've got my talk to around half hour, 45 minutes. So we have plenty of time to talk, and want to have this be as interactive as possible. So yeah, see, Mike says, Mike Turner says you can pop the chat box out of the main window. Yeah, you can play around with some of these settings, and if you have 2 screens, you can move the chat box to another screen. That's what I've got. Like, I'm looking at you all at the camera, and on my secondary screen, I have all the chats and the questions that will be coming up. So, but we'll go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen. And also, if anybody needs to cut out early, that's not a problem. I'm recording this live on YouTube, and at the end of the session, I'll go back and edit that YouTube link to cut out the beginning, because there's about a half hour where I'm just sitting here sending emails because I wanted to make sure everything was working, and I'll cut it back to 11 o'clock. So we will go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share screens here, and we'll go ahead and start with the PowerPoint. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Yes, okay, sounds good. Well, what I wanted to share with you all today is the research that we've been doing on the rest of the plantation. As you all know, Montpelier is the home of James and Dolly Madison, and was home to over 300 enslaved individuals who were working and living on the property during James Madison's lifetime. And how is often the case, the focus of Montpelier is the visitor grounds, where the main house is, and the rest of this 2,700 acres that's out here is often not really all that much explored by visitors. And what I wanted to talk about today is our more immediate project, which is looking at some of these work areas. You know, how we go about doing the metal detector survey for that, how we make those discoveries, and then get into a little bit more detail on the Overseer project and the work we're doing at the home farm. But what I wanted to do to start out is to go into some details about what I mean by workscapes. You know, what are those, as opposed to the kind of landscapes you see in the picture right here that you classically think of when you visit a president's home. You know, a beautiful main house up on the hill, and then maybe some buildings around it, but characterized by green lawns. And of course, being a plantation, the main house for the enslaved community had a very different meaning. That was a symbol of power, in many cases a symbol of oppression and fear. And so this is something that, telling whole truth history, trying to get what this place was, how this place really how daily life was carried out in this, it's necessary to really get into that to a much larger story. So with the work that we've been doing in archaeology for the past 20 years, what we've really focused on is trying to find the homes of the enslaved families that lived and worked at Montpelier. And as many of you all know, a really good example of this is the South Yard, which we have, through archaeology located, and then we've done a fairly complete restoration of the buildings, and we're working next on restoring the yards. But we have these spaces very visible to the public, thanks to the archaeology that we're able to do there. And we've done the same thing at the field quarter. And the field quarter is down below the visitor center. And this shot right here, where the red highlighter is, that's the visitor center. And this area below here is where we found evidence of slave quarters. And in this case, this is the subfloor pit. But at both of these sites, and this is the restored building that we've built back in place with our log cabin reconstruction programs, at this exact site right here where the subfloor pit is found, and one of our archaeologists is excavating that. This shot was taken back in 2012. Now, what allows us to find these sites is the large amount of artifacts that are present at these sites. Being a living spot where people, are raising their families, doing household chores, and living and working at these spaces for over 20 years, there's a lot of trash, broken ceramics, glass, animal bone that's generated, and that gets scattered around the edges of the yards. And for archaeologists, it's relatively easy to find these because when we dig our shovel test pits, which are round holes about 1 foot in diameter, every 20 to 15 feet, these artifacts show up very easily in the screens when we're screening for the artifacts. Now, for a lot of you all have been to the archaeology lab or have seen what we've found at these sites, and they're really spectacular artifacts. The ceramics look like they were broken yesterday after they're cleaned up in the lab. The bottle glass looks very much the same, as does the bone. But when you think about, what would be left if people weren't living at these areas, if they weren't doing cooking, if they weren't processing animals for food consumption, if they weren't breaking dishes, and you think about what this area would look like if it was just barns, say a storage shed, a granary, or in the fields, a processing area, there wouldn't be that much left. But say if one of these buildings either burnt down or is just abandoned to rot in place, what do you all think would be left of those buildings? What would you expect to find when you went back some 200 years later? And this is a chance for you all to interact. You could either raise your hands, whatever you feel comfortable doing it, or type in some type in the chat window. All right, I see Peggy. Yeah, Peggy knows all this. She's been there and lived it. Peggy, you're saying nails and hardware. Absolutely. And what's the feature of nails that allows them to be found with the metal detector? And sorry to ask such a silly, ridiculous. Yes, it's a pretty obvious answer because they're iron. Exact, Patrick too. They're iron, and that's what for metal detectorists. For folks that come on our programs who do metal detecting as a hobby, when they come to Montpelier, they're expecting to find all kinds of things like coins, buttons, maybe buckles from shoes. And when we tell them all we want them to find is nails, they get a little exasperated until we tell them how much information we can gain from nails. And really what a lot of metal detectorists have started calling nails is Montpelier gold, because it's that level of excitement when we find the nails, because as I'll show you in a few minutes, we can actually date the sites that we find with metal detector surveys through the nails, and then also tell what kind of site it is, whether it's, if it's just a grouping of nails and no other hardware, it could just be a tobacco barn. But if it's, say, a threshing barn, you'd find threshing teeth at it. And then if you start to find thimbles, buttons, scissors, things that would be associated with a domestic site, like a living site, it's not just a barn, it was somebody's home. So we can put this complex set of assemblages together to really understand what we've got all from a basic metal detector survey. And when I show you how we do the metal detector surveys, you can see why these are so useful for finding these sites. Now, some of the other sites that we've got out there, and we're currently looking at in some of the wood survey, is fields that don't leave as much hardware. We're looking at that through LiDAR surveys. And when at the end of the seminar, I will go ahead and send you all a link to an article that I'm working on and a web map that shows how we locate those through LiDAR. And LiDAR, does anybody know what LiDAR is? We'll see if anybody has seen any of my LiDAR presentations. We'll give a pause here. I'll keep talking so you don't think I've locked up here. And yeah, Brooklyn, you mentioned it's similar to GIS. Absolutely. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, is how we map in all of the finds that we make, our metal detector hits, our units, and we use GIS as a tool for really showing our LiDAR maps. What LiDAR is in the case of what we did at Montpelier, we had a plane fly over Montpelier and produce a high resolution terrain map that we can look at in GIS. So we take the LiDAR data and put it into GIS to help visualize it. And Patrick's saying, shows terrain by light images from above and especially shows linear features on the ground. Absolutely. And the linear features that really show up are these, for example, in the cases of these fields, or even the last set of plow furrows that are in the woods out there today that you can't see with the naked eye, but with a LiDAR you can see. So what we're talking about with all this is, looking at these sites of labor that oftentimes at these plantations get overlooked. And the reason why we're so interested in showing these is this was a big part of the everyday experience for the enslaved community. It was the main part of the economy for the Madisons. So they're very concerned about what was happening in these fields because it's where their wealth and their income was generated. And it's something that, oftentimes just gets overlooked. And so the reason why we're interested in this at Montpelier is we want to do full-scale restoration. And due to the lack of documented records, we're using the clues we can get from the ground to reconstruct where these fields are and where the labor is taking place and what that labor looked like, because that's a real important clue to understanding how the Montpelier plantation intersects with Madison's life and the history of our country. So with the reliance on the archaeological record, one thing that we've found at Montpelier is just we have incredible preservation. And this is really due to the history of Montpelier. From the 1720s through to 1844 is the time period that the Madisons owned the property. And there are 3 generations of Madisons that are responsible for really shaping how that labor takes place and what kind of crops are being grown. And but after the Madisons sell the property, after Dolly sells the property in 1844, really what happens to Montpelier is 2 centuries of preservation. All through the Civil War and into the early 20th century, late 19th century, you go from over 100 slaves down to about 25 up until the Civil War. And so fields become abandoned, areas that are former work areas become fields, sites are just left alone. And then when the DuPonts buy the property in 1901, they don't need to make money off the fields. They don't need to make money off of cutting timber. What they do is allow all these sites to remain, in some ways unintentionally protected, but protected. And it's given a real gift to us where we've got 2,700 acres of sites that we can explore to figure out what happened here during the Madison era. So what we've been doing with that is we've been able to begin to piece together some of the agricultural history of the 3 generations of Madisons that who ran and owned Montpelier. And this starts out with really getting us to use this 2,700 acres you can see here in a much more broad way, from just being the visitor core to looking at this larger set of properties. So what the first generation of Madisons under Frances Madison, what she was doing at Montpelier is she early in her period of widowhood in the 1730s, she's having her slaves and overseers grow tobacco. And this image on the upper right of the screen is a watercolor by Latrobe showing an overseer basically supervising enslaved female workers out in a recently cleared woodlot growing tobacco. And basically what they've done is they've girdled the trees, and then when you girdle it, you cut off about a foot of bark all the way around the base of the tree. They die. It allows sunlight to hit what was the forest floor, and the slaves would hoe the soil up to create soil mounds for planting tobacco. Eventually, those trees would be cut, like you can see in this picture, but there's no really way to do plowing in this situation because you have large amounts of roots that would be interfering with the plow. So really up until about the American Revolution, this was the primary form of agriculture at Montpelier, with tobacco being a strong economic crop to be exported, and there being plenty of soil to really take advantage of for growing tobacco. Now, the problem with tobacco is it's very nutrient intensive. This sort of hoe agriculture doesn't cause massive erosion, but it does cause depletion of the nutrients of the soil. And this is where James Madison Sr., when he and his wife Nellie arranged for the large house to be built, and really, Montpelier to be the house that we think of today in many ways, by the American Revolution, what he's having his slaves do is do more plowing. So he starts some of the earliest plowing in the Piedmont, and he's having his overseers and slaves grow crops that are grain based, so wheat, corn, and this is also for export. But what he's doing with the plowing is when they start plowing in the Piedmont, there's no understanding of what happens with soil erosion, and the kind of plowing they carry out is what's called directional plowing, where they plow across the slope. And what happens when you have a rainstorm is basically all that rainwater is channelized into these furrows, and then you have this massive sheet erosion that occurs, and all this soil washes into gullies, and areas that are slopes rapidly become absolutely unsuitable for agriculture. And by the time of the 1790s, what a lot of plantation owners are realizing is this is unsustainable. And this is the case of James Madison Jr. When he takes over the operation of the plantation in the 1790s, what he starts to have his slaves and overseers engage in is what's termed as scientific farming, where not only is he promoting and trying to have his overseer and slaves do manuring of fields, pasturing of animals in fields to allow cropland to go fallow, but also engages in the plowing, doing more contour plowing, where you almost create little terraces in these sloped areas. And all during the 1790s and 18 teens, he's experimenting with this scientific farming. And by the time he and Dolly retire to the White House in 1817, really the economy in this part of the Virginia Piedmont and where crop production is happening it's really not sustainable so much for agriculture. And what the Madisons begin to do is to make more money off of selling slaves than selling crops. And this begins this slow process of where the enslaved community is starting to be broken up and sold to the Deep South, where there's a lot more money and resources to be made off of cotton production. And so by the time you get into when Madison passes away in 1836, you've got about a third of the enslaved community has been sold. And then during the time period of when Madison passes away and Dolly Madison sells the property in 1844, about another third of the enslaved community is sold under hers and John Payne Todd, her son's management. And by the time Dolly sells the property in 1844, there's just a small portion of the community that's left at Montpelier. And in 1844, when the property is sold, that means so much of what was cropland and work areas are abandoned. And similar to what happens in the South Yard by 1848, these buildings are either intentionally taken down or they're just allowed to decay in place, like we'll see with the farm complex that were in the fields below the visitor center. So with this abandonment of the property, and over the next 150 years or so, not much happening on the landscape at Montpelier, what happens is you get just incredible preservation of the archaeological record. So for instance, in the area of the South Yard, what we have is basically, topsoil builds up since 1848 when these buildings are taken down, and just the archaeological record is exquisitely well preserved. And what we've been able to do in the South Yard is, not only do the archaeology to understand what's there, but to actually be able to get enough information to restore these buildings. And for example, everything from the duplexes that we excavated in 2001 that you can see here, to the smokehouses that we excavated in 2015 after we got the gift from David Rubenstein, to the slave dwelling, which started out as a spinning house, and then also the kitchen up in this area. All these sites are preserved well enough where we can literally reconstruct them. And in the process of doing this reconstruction, what we've done is, been able to go beyond just reconstructing the buildings, but reconstructing the lifeways that went into this plantation, which was the enslaved community. And we've done a lot of work with our descendant community to really understand how to present this space. And this is where, our exhibit that we've had for the past 3 years, the Mere Distinction of Color, what we've done is brought in the voices of the descendant community to begin to really talk about the slave labor that happened at Montpelier in a way that recognizes not just the contributions that the sacrifices the enslaved community made, but also the contributions they made to our country, and make this history one that's relevant for everybody, not just, for Mr. Madison, but make the contributions of a larger body of folks that are here at Montpelier something that is recognizable for anyone visiting Montpelier. Now, in the process of doing, this work and doing the archaeology in the South Yard, we've had a lot of discussions with the descendant community. And one of the things that they have wanted us to also emphasize is not just the lives of the enslaved domestics, but the majority of the folks that were enslaved at Montpelier, who were the field workers. And that's what's really generated our interest in going beyond the main house and the quarters in the South Yard to the larger farm complex. And these discussions, what they've allowed us to do is to begin exploring the areas that are in the fields below the visitor center. So if you look at this image right here, here's today's visitor center. Here's the parking lot where visitors park. The main house is up in what appears to be a woodlot up here. And this field that's down here is actually closer to today's parking lot and visitor center than the main house is from the visitor center. So, and what happens to be in this field that we found through metal detector surveys are just all kinds of sites, everything from slave quarters to stables to work sheds, threshing barns, and tobacco barns, an overseer's house, a blacksmith shop, and a series of slave quarters. And a lot of these sites we found during our construction of the visitor center, because originally when the visitor center was being built in this area, the landscape architects had conceived of a road where visitors would come across this field and then enter in this direction to see the visitor center kind of, as they drove up to it, dramatically rise up from the landscape. And there's going to be parking lots in this area. Well, but before they started doing that work, we started doing survey in this area and found all kinds of sites. And the majority of these sites we found through shovel test pits where, the domestic sites that are in blue showed up very well. These other sites that are in red are these work sites that didn't show up with large amounts of artifacts. And how we found these sites is through metal detector survey, like we were talking about in the beginning. And how we do metal detector survey at Montpelier is through a process of what's called gridded metal detector survey. And the gridded metal detector surveys, what these are all about is basically gridding the property off into 1/10 of an acre plots. So each of these little squares that you see right here is about 1/10 of an acre, or about 20 meters by 20 meters, or about 66 by 66 feet square. And what metal detectors do is they sweep each of these squares, and any historic artifacts they come across, they sample to see what the hits are, and then we do an estimated count of how many historic hits are in each of these squares, and that's how we're able to produce this heat map that shows where the sites are. So, for example, on this map right here, all these areas that are in green and red and yellow are areas where we've done metal detector survey, and this key up here, you can see how many hits we found. When you get into the area of 17 up to 100 hits, you've got a site. And in the case of where the main house is and the visitor center is, in these two locations right here, you can see there's this dense area of hits. And what we're able to do with these metal detector hits is the most of these hits are nails, like the one metal detector right here is showing. And what we're able to do with nails, like I mentioned before, is what makes them so wonderful to Montpelier is that the nails you can actually date to the different time periods of occupation at Montpelier. So the hand forged nails, which are at the top here, the rose head and T-headed downturned nails, these all date to around the time of the American Revolution. Machine-made nails with either a hand-forged tip or a handmade head dates to around the 1790s, when James Madison Jr. starts taking over the operation of the plantation and changing the agricultural enterprises. And then finally, the retirement years is typified by these fully machine-cut nails. And then even the post-Madison era, after 1848, what you get are these different manufacturing type of machine-cut nails that in the ground looks different enough from these other nails that we can date the sites. And so with that, what we've got is a tool to not only find the sites, but also figure out what time period they date from. And of course, when you get into the DuPont period, what you get is wire nails and a lot more metal objects. So we can even, we can differentiate the Madison sites from the more modern sites. So with this technology and the mapping in GIS, what we're able to do is not only find sites, but also date them. And in the case of, go back to this map, I'm going to blow up this area right here, which is right here. So here's the visitor center, here's the parking lot. Here's the main house, here's the visitor center and parking lot in this area. This is the home farm area, and the Madison Family Cemetery is right in this area. If we blow up this area even more, what you can see from our 20-meter surveys is we've been able to find and define a number of sites in these areas, and then also date them based on the nails. So in terms of these earlier fully hand-wrought nails, there's only one site that dates to this Revolutionary War period, which is Mount Pleasant. If you look at the sites dating to the 1790s, you've got this tobacco barn. And then finally, the rest of these sites date to the retirement years, when James Madison Jr. centralizes all the work areas, including the blacksmith shop that used to be over at the temple, over by the overseer's house, which is by the Madison Family Cemetery. So with this 20-meter survey, what we're able to do is find the sites. But then when we want to really define where the buildings are, what we do is we go from a 20-meter grid, and you can see the size of a 20-meter grid in this photograph right here. We go from 20 meters all the way down to a 10-foot grid. And with this 10-foot grid, what we're able to do is be able to really get much better resolution on where the artifact concentrations are. So you go from this very coarse map here to a much more refined map, where where you've got the field quarter right here, it's kind of this larger blob. With this 10-foot survey, we're able to figure out where the buildings are in this area. And up at the tobacco barn, you go from something rather nondescript to this little concentration right here. And when we started to look at the tobacco barn in excavations in 2012, we centered our units in this area right here. And what we found is where this concentration of hits were, what we found in metal detector survey was a mixture of nails, but also threshing teeth that are part of what would have been a threshing machine. And so we figured out there was something interesting in this area, and we started opening up units. And what we found is when we opened up units in this area, what we eventually came across were these areas that were these squared off burn trenches here. There's one area here, and my mouse is being incredibly difficult right now. One area here and one area up in this area. And this turned out to be the remains of a tobacco barn that later on was used as a threshing barn. And what these trenches turn out to be are, they were used when this barn was tobacco barn. These trenches were dug inside the barn for smoke curing the tobacco. And then sometime in the 18 teens, this tobacco barn was changed over into a threshing barn. And where this yellow square is right here, there was a threshing machine installed. And that's where all these threshing machine parts came from. And so what we're able to do with the archaeology following the metal detector surveys is really follow the evolution of not only this building, but also the evolution of the plantation as the economy changed from tobacco over to grains and more scientific farming that Madison was engaged in. So with this, what we're able to do is, locate these sites, do enough excavations where we've been able to go from pretty much a empty field that we didn't know much about into actually creating imagery. And we did this. This is an image that the University of Arkansas's Center for Advanced Spatial Technology helped us out with. We've developed 3D renderings of what this space would have looked like. So if we flash back and forth here, here's the visitor center. Here's Westgate Road right here. This is Westgate Road. Here's the location of the parking lot and the visitor center. Where the picnic area is today behind the visitor center, that's where the stable is located. And then all this area down here was this basically village of activity. And there's, it's very spread out. You've got a blacksmith shop over here, a farrier shop in this area, but it was this hub of industry that really served the basis for the wealth of the Madisons. And this is an area that we're just starting to explore. We've done the metal detector surveys on the 20-meter basis, but over the next 2 years, we're going to be doing 10-foot metal detector surveys to explore each of these sites. And one of the sites that we're looking at, that we need to look at with metal detector survey, are these sites in yellow. The tobacco barn and the overseer's house and the field quarter, we've already done 10-foot survey on. And then once we do the 10-foot survey, we're going to come in and open up excavation units. And right now we're focused on is the overseer's house. And at the overseer's house, what we've done is begun, we've done the 10-foot survey. We just this past season, we began to open up units. And the overseer's house is an area we're starting on because basically this was command central of this home farm complex. And understanding this space is, and by starting at the overseer's house, the best analogy I've got is, understanding the south yard if we didn't know where the main house was. So if we had done excavations on the south yard and had no idea where the Montpelier mansion was, say if it burned during the Civil War, it would be really hard to understand how the south yard was organized. And in the same way with the home farm complex, what we want to do is understand the position of the overseer in relationship to the rest of this space. After that, begin to do excavations on the rest of these areas to bring this whole picture into a much larger context. And the overseer, how we know the overseer's house is located in this location comes from, one is a primary source, which is a document. We're fortunate enough that when Dolly Madison sold the property in 1844, there was a land plat made that showed that the overseer's house was somewhere between the main house and the mill. And if you look at a map right here, let me move my picture window out of the way here. Move it up, move it over here. Here, the main house right here is right here. where the mill is on this map is just off this map, it's just off the screen to the left. And so let's see, this is rather inconvenient. I'm going to put my picture right here. Where the main house is in this location. Where the overseer's house is right here in this location. Where Westgate Road is right along this area, and Westgate Road runs along here. And when we were doing excavations at the slave quarters down in this area, we came across a set of wagon ruts that were apparently in the middle of nowhere. We had no idea where they were, but they became really important later on when we started mapping everything in GIS, including this map right here, to understanding how this map related to the landscape over here. And this involves really starting to pick apart some of these road networks. So if you look at where these set of wagon ruts go, this corresponds with a road that's right here. And how we know that is where Westgate Road is. This on the real landscape, it's right here. On the 1844 plat, it's right here. It, for some reason on this plat, dead ends in the middle of nowhere, because today Westgate Road keeps on going down the hill. But if you think about where the mill is right here, this is just off the map, and the mill has a mill pond that's associated with it. Well, when we started doing GIS mapping, what we realized is this bottomland down here was all flooded during the Madison era. And these wagon ruts that we found in this location were the direction of where Chicken Mountain originally went and avoided that pond. And it's because of that, this is where Westgate Road ended during the Madison era. Later on, when the mill was abandoned by the DuPont era, the DuPonts had Westgate Road extended all the way down, and Chicken Mountain Road is in the position that's in today. So using a combination of GIS, metal detector survey, and then these maps, we're able to put together the road network. And then right where these two roads come together, this is where the overseer's house is. And then the blacksmith shop is just on the other side of the road. And actually, the DuPont Road cuts the blacksmith shop in half, unfortunately. But you understand even more how this position is command central for the overseer. Not only is it really it's the highest point on the terrain, they can see all this area, but it also provides a division of the space, in what was the home farm complex. So for the overseer's house, what we're interested in is not only understanding about the overseer in terms of the running of the plantation, but also understanding who the overseers were. And for the overseers, we've got, from the historical records, we've got several names. Gideon Gooch was the overseer between 1803 and 1815. And then 1815 up to 1828, for over a decade, Abram Edens was the overseer. And we're thinking what we're going to be finding at the overseer's house primarily relates to Edens. That this is the majority of the artifacts we're finding date to the 1820s. And then after the 1820s, late 1820s into the 1830s, you go through about 4 or 5 overseers. So there's a lot of turnover at Montpelier. And how we're looking for the overseers at Montpelier is, of course, with archaeology, discovering more about their households. With the excavations we're doing at the overseer's house, we're finding lots and lots of personal items, such as ceramics, glass. We're finding small beads, buttons. And what we're hoping to do is to put all this together to understand, are there differences between the overseers who are at Montpelier? And is there a chance that any of these overseers were or were not living at Montpelier? And this is where we're going to be looking at ceramics and other artifacts to see how similar they were to, what we're finding at the field quarter just on the other side of the road. So the other thing we're interested in looking at is, what this building looked like. And this would have been, largely determined by the Madisons. They would have been making the choice about whether the overseer's house was a structure, similar to what we have in the South Yard, or was it more of a log building? And the kind of clues we're looking for that is, if the overseer's house had a brick chimney instead of a stick and mud chimney, what would you expect that we'd find in the archaeological record? And I'll go away from my monologue to have you all chip in on this. So if you had a structure with a brick chimney as opposed to a stick and mud chimney, and this building was torn down or allowed to decay in place, yeah, okay, Peggy said it. Yeah, lots of brick fragments, and that's something that we are finding at the overseer's house. Is we're finding a lot of brick, but then what we're also finding is we've found some pits that suggest that we might either have a borrow pit, which is typically used for daubing the between the logs of a structure. So it's either that there are multiple structures at the overseer's house, or that we could have a log structure with a brick chimney. So we're in the early days of this, and this is where it's really exciting to do archaeology in spaces like this, where today there's absolutely nothing. You've got a bare field, and what we're looking to do is do enough archaeology to really begin to understand this space. And so, for example, out in this area in here, the visitor center is up in this area. Today, all this area in here is basically empty fields. And so what our goal is with the archaeology is to dig enough and discover enough in the home farm to begin to do the kind of reconstructions we've done at the South Yard. And with the kind of ghost timbering frames that we've done in the South Yard, we're going to continue to do those at the field quarters and at all these structures. And then hopefully, one day, get to the point where this will, conjure up the imagination of a donor who would want to reconstruct these areas. So hope always springs eternal at Montpelier for this to be, the next South Yard area. So what I'd love to do at this point is open up the floor to questions and comments. And if anybody wants to raise their hand, I can actually give you the opportunity to talk. I can click this over on my window right here. If you'd rather type in your questions, we could do that as well. We're hoping to get back in the field late this summer. We're still hoping we can do the field school sometime in late June or early July, and then we're hoping that we can start our field programs in late July and August. But we've got to see if we can beat this curve and pound this virus down to know when exactly that'll happen. But again, we all want to get out of our houses, but not before this virus gets knocked down. So, one thing we could do is let's see. So Mike asks, has work on the temple and the Pine Alley has that been put on hold in order to concentrate on the overseer's house? Yeah, the work we were doing at the Pine Alley last year, we completed our goals, Mike, which was to excavate enough of the Pine Alley to be able to plant at least 6 trees. And so what we've done at the Pine Alley is we've planted those 6 trees. And what we had planned on doing is to head over to the home farm after that. So about August of last year is when we moved our excavation headquarters over to beside the Madison Family Cemetery, where the overseer's house is. And we're going to be working over at the overseer's house in the home farm probably for the next 3 years or maybe even more. I'd like to eventually one day return to the temple and the 18th century blacksmith shop, because that would make an amazing project to look at the 18th century. But what we want to do before that is really get enough information on this home farm to be able to give people, get enough restored out of that space so people can really begin to imagine what this space was, with returning some of these buildings either with these ghosted structures or do some even more intensive reconstruction out there. So let's see, does anybody want to try their hand at speaking? We need to I need to experiment with this. If anybody's brave enough, I know it's sometimes awkward to do that, but if anybody else has any questions or any other kind of artifacts they'd like to see, I've got other presentations I can bring up. See, how many of you all who are here have been to Montpelier? We'll try a survey where if you click raise your hand, we can see how many of you all have been to Montpelier. So Patrick, Jean, Barbara, Patricia, May and Mike, Erica, Jim, Mike, Emily, I think you've been to Montpelier. Peggy. Yeah, so most of y'all have been to Montpelier. So let's see. So I'm gonna clear lower. I'm gonna lower all hands for that survey, and then looks like we've got some questions coming in from Peggy. Peggy asks, your vision for the reconstruction of the home farm complex. Has any other historic home done a similar reconstruction? And the answer to that is yes and no. Mount Vernon has done a reconstruction of their farm area, but it's not in the actual location where the farm is. So where they have their treading mill and a reconstructed slave quarter is an area that's in the visitor core, but that treading mill and slave quarter was much further away in a separate quarter. So there's no other plantation that I know of, at least a presidential plantation, where the main farm complex is just down the hill from where the parking lot is. So our placement of the parking lot and visitor center back in 2002 in this area was just almost dumb luck to be able to really highlight one of the most important parts of the plantation. And it really offers just an exciting opportunity to do this. Yeah, so it would be. And Mike asks, can we bring up an example of some of the LiDAR maps? Let me see if I've got these. I think if I skip down, see, I've got, yeah, here's an example of these LiDAR maps, Mike. This is the whole property right here that's outlined in black. And then here's Chicken Mountain. The main house is right here. And in the terms of the LiDAR maps, what the LiDAR allows you to do is to create these high resolution maps. And in the case of Chicken Mountain, you can zoom into the area that's right here, and you get this high resolution imagery of this erosion gully. And in profile, this profile right here is this profile shown on this upper part of the photograph. This is actually a slice through the light point cloud as collected by the airplane. And the bare earth model, you can see right here, this is what we use to generate this, this hillshade model. And then what we do with the point cloud that captures the trees is that gets cut away. And then we use this bare earth segment of the light that's bounced off the ground to create this terrain map. And what I'll do is after this, this webinar, I'll send you all a link to these web maps that you all can explore. Oh, and Brooklyn is asking, was the visitor center parking lot there before you all started work on the plantation? No, it wasn't. When I started at Montpelier in 2000, where the visitor center and the visitor center parking lot was all a field. And actually where the visitor center was located, that immediate area was a swimming pool complex for the DuPont family. And then also a tennis court was where the first year of parking is. So we chose the location of the parking lot and the visitor center initially because it had already been disturbed by the DuPonts. And in the process of doing our excavations, what we found was the area where the visitor center parking lot is today, that was pasture that was used by Madison's slaves for all the draft animals. So there were literally no sites where the visitor center and the parking lot was built. And in so many ways, it was just this serendipity of, of good fortune that when the DuPonts chose a spot to build their visitor center and parking lot, when they chose a spot to build their their swimming pool and tennis court, they didn't build it where the South Yard was, for example. They put it where in the Madison era, it was all pasture and there were no sites to be disturbed. So it was just absolutely, and if we go back to the map right here, you can see that this area right here, if we go back to this map right here, the visitor center and the parking lot here, right here, this was all pasture during the Madison era. So just really good luck on that. So Jim's asking, will there be any other excavation sites in the USA, in the United States, that will allow citizens to participate in expeditions as you do at Montpelier? There are other programs that offer these citizen-based science programs that we offer. Crow Canyon does this in the Southwest for Native American sites, but there's no other site that in the U.S. that for historic sites and on plantation sites where we offer the range of programs that we have. And actually, I'll send out a list of those programs that we've got in the follow-up email to the webinar. So Pat's asking, did the DuPonts intentionally attempt to maintain the property as in Madison's time? To the answer to that is probably not, but they definitely did. They were trying to preserve parts of it, like the main house. There was things that happened at the main house where when the DuPonts DuPonts added their wings onto the house, they of course did do damage to the original Madison fabric. But in so many cases, they literally moved, dozens of doors and windows to different locations in the house. And whether this was because of some fetishization of the Madison era, or just that, their workers reused doors and windows because they were perfectly good, is hard to say. But what really allowed the preservation to happen at Montpelier is the fact that the DuPonts were not trying to make money off the property with plowing these areas for agriculture. And the turning this area where the visitor center and parking lot is today into a swimming pool and tennis court complex made this into more of a social setting and an area for entertaining with the DuPonts, which made it, this area into an area that they wouldn't want to have, their farm workers plowing and creating dust clouds. So there's a lot of serendipity and just changing uses of the property that allowed this preservation to occur. So what I'll do for everybody is, following this, I'm going to make I'll send everybody an email, and I'll send you making a list now, that we have an archaeology booklet that I'll send you all as a PDF you can download. I'll send you a link to the Overseer's Project to the Home Farm project, and then also the East Woods LiDAR maps. And then I'll also, in case some of you all had to step off early, I'll send you a link to the to this webinar. So, but does anybody else have any additional questions or just want to say hi? It's great to see so many friends here. So Peggy, I'm gonna put you on. So Peggy, okay, are you there, Peggy?
Yes, I wrote a question. Did you see it, Matt? Have any shovel test pits been done within the DuPont formal gardens? Oh, what was in that spot during the Madison retirement era?
Yeah, hi Peggy, and good to hear your voice. That was a vegetable garden during the Madison's time period. So the terracing in the DuPont formal garden was put in place in the 18 teens. And no, we have not done any formalized testing in the garden. So the area that you see right here where my highlighter is, that's the formal garden. And we've done testing out here, and we've got evidence for planting beds, and that's where we think this hippodrome shaped garden is, in this location, but we have not tested this area. So there's potential for finding, you know, an even earlier garden in this area. We just don't know. That's, you know, we haven't done work on the garden because the garden is, it's a beautiful spot right now. It
Right.
represents the Madison area use of the space in a pretty representative way. And what we've decided to do is really focus on some of the areas that are just absolutely, you know, blank slates of information that we want to capture.
Right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peggy. Good hearing from you. So let's see. Well, if there's no other questions, what I'll do is we'll go ahead and sign off. It's been wonderful having you all on the seminar. We have more seminars that we're going to be doing. Like I said, Emily is going to be doing her seminar next. And I don't know if Emily is still on the line. I will send links to the rest of our seminars that we've got. And for those of you all that want to join the archaeology mailing list, I will I'll give you that opportunity as well. And it looks like Jim has a question. Hi, Jim. Have there ever been any test pits in the lawn area behind the house? Yes, in this area behind the house, we did do extensive shovel test pits because in 2004, we put an underground bunker that houses all the utilities and HVAC. And that's where we found the level back lawn was terraced in the 18 teens. And there's over 5 feet of fill in some parts of the back lawn that has resulted in a buried 18th century surface. So there's some fantastic areas to be found in the back lawn as well. So, but thank you, Jim, for that question. All right, well, it's great seeing you all today. And if you all have any other questions, definitely email you. You can email me. I'm gonna, later on this evening, after I edit the YouTube video down to where it starts at 11 o'clock, I'll go ahead and send you all that link. But I hope everyone is healthy and well at their respective homes. And we look forward to seeing you out at Montpelier when we get out of the mess we're in right now. So wonderful talking with you all, and hope to talk to you all soon. Bye, everybody. And I should have put my face up. Bye, everyone.